Welcome to the podcast recording of Middle East AI News Live for Thursday, December 14th, 2023, brought to you by Carrington Malin, Marketing for an AI-First World. You're listening to my discussion with Magdalena Konig, General Counsel for Abu Dhabi AI Solutions Company AIQ, where we talk about the new Artificial Intelligence Act, provisionally agreed by the European Commission last week, and what it means for the world.
In today's Thursday Deep Dive, we're going to be talking about the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. The European Union reached a provisional deal on the comprehensive rules governing artificial intelligence last Friday. The new law will cover government and business use of AI, the responsibilities of AI developers and technology firms introducing AI, and the new regulation will also cover issues such as government use of facial recognition for surveillance, data governance of large language models, which of course has become topical over the past year with the popularity of ChatGPT and others. So what is the EU AI Act? What does it cover? What do we need to know about it? These are some of the questions that we'll be addressing today. And I'm going to be joined by Magdalena Konig from AIQ. Magdalena Konig is a member of AIQ's executive leadership team, responsible for the company's legal affairs and oversight of legal governance and compliance. She provides advice to the company management team, board, shareholders, and oversees all legal matters and governance procedures at AIQ. Magdalena actually played a role in the formation of the joint venture back in 2020, being previously a member of ADNOC's Legal Governance and Compliance Directorate. ADNOC, she was responsible for IT legal counsel across the group of 16 companies, focusing on digital transformation projects, data protection, security, and I imagine much more. Now Magdalena has a keen focus on technology and on upcoming regulations, which is why I thought she'd be a great guest today. And she follows a very broad range of subjects, including the legalities of integration implementation, strategic IT and business process outsourcing, cloud services, data management, licensing, and obviously, since we're talking about the subject, artificial intelligence. And I've been a keen follower of Magdalena on LinkedIn for a long time because of her frequent insights on AI policymaking and the snippets of upcoming AI regulations. So looking forward to having that discussion today. So a warm welcome to Middle East AI News Live, Magdalena Konig.
Thank you so much, Carrington. Thank you so much for having me. And good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks very much for taking the time to join us and talking about the new EU AI Act and its impact. It's a huge topic, and I think it's become a lot more interesting to people over the past year with the popularity of ChatGPT and the sort of increase of consciousness for large language models and what they do and what AI is going to do in the future. So this otherwise seemingly boring topic is actually probably of interest to a lot of people right now.
Well, yeah, I definitely hope so. I mean, I've been working in the technology sector for a while, and I mean, AI isn't a new thing by any means. We've been looking at AI since around the 1950s, but you're exactly right. The whole explosion of AI, its capabilities with OpenAI's ChatGPT in the last kind of 12 months has really brought the capabilities and maybe the risks and opportunities of artificial intelligence to the forefront, which is why the EU's AI Act and the announcement that we had of the provisional agreement of the wording of the Act is so exciting.
It is. And I think it's partly because there's been quite a lot of scaremongering and, also serious discussion on valid risks and things that we need to look out for. Over the past year, it's been talked about in US Congress. We've seen technology giants, leaders, CEOs, and other very senior people present to governments all over the world, US, UK, Germany, EU. And so this is a hot topic. Great to have you here to discuss it.
Thank you so much.
So before we get stuck into the EU AI Act, it would be great if you could just give us a recap on what AIQ is up to. And so I know it was formed in 2020 as a joint venture, and the obviously ADNOC has got a huge need to look at ways of leveraging and optimizing with AI. And you've had a lot of announcements this year as well. Could you just start us off by telling us what the focus of AIQ is today? And, any sort of recap of this year would be very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So as you mentioned, AIQ, we bring together information, data about the oil and gas and energy sector from the likes of ADNOC Group, and we put that together with the supercomputing capacity of G42, and we develop, deploy, commercialize artificial intelligence solutions for optimizing, promoting, looking at health and safety risk in the energy sector. And I'm glad you mentioned about what we've been doing this year, because we've been looking at how we can kind of broaden our reach and kind of make our solutions more accessible to a wider range of potential clients. Because what we're finding is, lots of industries and the solutions that we have are actually applicable across many different use cases. So, for example, mining, refining. So we're really looking at how we can pivot the existing use cases that we're looking at from the energy sector into a broader audience. And in order to do that, we've signed some really, really exciting deals this year, which you kind of touched on there, because we realize we've got some massive, massive goals, just like the UAE kind of government for the whole AI space in general. And we realize, that we can't do that alone. So we're working with local and international partners to really further that goal and that aspiration. The shareholders are really, really supportive of us in kind of moving forward, which is great.
Yeah, I noticed this year that you announced partnerships with the G42 group company that specializes in geospatial data and technology, Halliburton and NVIDIA. Of course, needs no introduction.
No flies on us.
It sounds like things are moving at an increasing pace and expanding. Is AIQ expanding?
We definitely hope so. I mean, and I'm not sure if you follow our CTO on LinkedIn, but we're always recruiting. So we're really keen to expand internationally in terms of our product offering and then also our geographical reach. Sorry.
Another deal that is of note this year is the agreement that you signed with Petronas, the Malaysian national company.
We're hoping that we'll be able to help them with some of their borehole related aspects.
And that deal sort of takes AIQ international, doesn't it?
It does indeed. We definitely hope so. When we're working on some other ways to facilitate our products being available on the international market as well. So watch this space is what I would say. So 2024 is going to be even more mental, but in the best possible way, of course.
Is it possible to give us just a couple of examples of the type of solutions that AIQ has produced that, are a good reference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the ones I love to reference, because it's actually quite an interesting and interactive one that lots of people can understand. We call it Smart HSE. And so at the moment, we have it deployed on vessels, and it utilizes live CCTV feed data and then AI and related algorithms in a command center to basically preempt health and safety issues, kind of near misses. So it provides an alert based on the learnings of the algorithm to preempt those health and safety issues, which in an oil and gas and energy and, even in other examples like construction or mining, health and safety issues can have critical outcomes. So that's a product that we're really excited about. We've also worked with ADNOC and Halliburton to develop something that we call RoboWell, which is looking at how you automate wells, which is another really, really exciting product and something that we're going to be looking at in greater detail in the future.
Looking forward to all your news in the coming year. You've just been to attend and speak, I think, at a conference in New York during the past week or so.
That's right. Yeah, last week I was in New York speaking at the AI Summit New York, which was a really, really great event. And actually, I sometimes don't know what view the Americans have of, the rest of the world. But the EU AI Act was, top of everyone's kind of agenda. And they were really, really interested to know, on the European and UK view of the EU Act and then of what's happening in the Middle East as well. So that was really, really exciting.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess a lot of people around the world are interested in this EU AI Act. And I wonder if it's because of, or partly due to, the success and the impact of GDPR. That's
a really good point. I think some people are excited. Other people are worried that, the likes of the EU AI Act will have the same impact that the GDPR has had globally. What they refer to it in Europe is the Brussels effect. And that really is the European legislation basically seeping into and creating a kind of a global standard That's really the hope of the EU Commission in the EU, or when they were drafting the initial AI Act. Personally, I don't see that happening at the moment. We've got such fractured different ways of thinking, across the UK, US, EU, China. I don't necessarily see the same trajectory that the GDPR had for the AI Act at the moment. Although we're seeing a bit more cooperation, with the G7, creating a collaboration. You've got some collaborations between the UK and the US. I'm still seeing very different approaches across those jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic in itself that with the data protection regulations, you had this sort of long period of discussion and analysis and awareness of the issues that they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now with the current rate of development in AI, we just haven't had anywhere near that time to think about it, let alone understand it and then put it into all the different contexts that we need to do. So I would expect there to be lots of differences. Perhaps another day. But this is an important context for us. I think the EU regulation coming out is important because it's the EU, and we've seen other landmark pieces of legislation come out of the EU that have turned out to be important globally. I think also it's important because we've been hearing about and seeing progress on different levels on AI regulation in the US and in the UK and Europe and other places. So what's on the radar now, regulation-wise? Are we expecting to see other regulations coming out in the next year, or is that too hopeful?
I think maybe in the next year or two. I think definitely from the US and the UK, we're going to see something. I know you'll definitely have seen Biden's executive order, creating the call for action for federal regulation in the US. The UK, they had their UK summit more recently, and they're really looking to also be a leader in this field. So I can't see them wanting to be left behind, or if you've got these other powerhouses regulating in this way, they're going to react as well. You had 29 countries signing the Bletchley Park Declaration. They're going to want to be part of and lead that, continue leading that movement. So yeah, it's definitely coming. And I think, the sooner we can all kind of be aware and be aligned with, the potential impact of the regulations and what that means for our businesses, then the better off we'll be. It's just hard. Sorry, to touch on the point you were just mentioning. I mean, the pacing problem is something that we're really mindful of. You were mentioning the timeline for the EU AI Act. It was originally drafted 2021. We've just seen so much activity in this space in the last, 12 months alone. It's crazy. So we now see that after the EU Act, when the final wording is agreed, hopefully in Q1 2024, you're then looking at a 2-year implementation. So that's another, we're waiting till 2026 till this act is going to be enforced. What kind of change are we going to see between now and then? That's going to be something that I'm going to be looking forward to seeing how the EU tackles that.
Absolutely, because 3 years in AI time is, now a very long time indeed. And it has changed hugely. I think the first discussion on this EU Act was 2019 or something. So that's the maximum of 3 years. So 4 years from deciding that we need a regulation to going ahead and putting it into and agreeing a provisional form.
I mean, part of the issue, even more recently, is you had a couple of jurisdictions come out and completely change their position, I think, for kind of geopolitical reasons, so kind of backtracking on the need for a strict law or hard law regulation, looking at or supporting self-regulation, or what I would call kind of soft law. So there's been a lot of kind of turmoil and discussion over soft law over hard law, and then also on the whole Gen AI foundational models piece as well.
Yeah, and we've had different and sometimes changing opinions from tech giants and from AI developers, where first there was a cry that regulations would stifle innovation and R&D. This was a bad thing, and now it seems the biggest tech companies are actually starting to lobby for regulation.
It depends how much of a cynic you are, really, because you could say whichever rhetoric they're leading with, they have their own interests at heart. Funny enough, going back to when I was in the US, there was a lot of talk around the similarities or whether we could potentially see a dip or decrease in innovation as a result of the AI Act. And the overwhelming response or discussion we were having is that actually GDPR didn't have as negative an impact on innovation as, the commentators and the critics of that act had envisaged. So yeah, that's just something that I took from my conversations last week.
Yeah, interesting. And 2026 is a long time away. So
It is.
Considering this took 3 or 4 years to put together, and it's going to take 3 years to end up being enacted, that's quite scary in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, touching on or kind of looking at some other jurisdictions, so like Saudi and more local to home, the UAE. The critics or the thinking here is that you really need regulation that's going to move with the industry and not be hindered by the pace of technology. I think I really loved this quote from the UAE's AI minister recently that said that the risk of over-regulating AI is akin to the Middle East not adopting the printing press. And I think that's a really interesting statement that he made and kind of definitely again shows the disparity and the differences in approaches to regulation across different jurisdictions.
Is it possible you could give us a top-down view of what this act is designed to do, what the goals are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all know that the idea is to, harmonize rules for governing AI. It adopts what they've called a risk-based approach. So basically, it looks to categorize AI systems. The riskier or the more potential harm the AI system can cause, the more requirements or the more kind of checks and balances are seen to be kind of put in place. And there's basically kind of 4 different risks or risk categories where different AI systems can be categorized. The obligations in the Act are on tech producers, developers, users, the AI definition that we have, so the scope of the Act is aligned with the OECD, which is very helpful. And that's a definition which I'm seeing being used across lots of different jurisdictions, which is positive. In terms of the risk, going back to the risk categories, you have unacceptable risk. These are things that are strictly prohibited and banned. For example, biometric ID systems, things like that. Although you have some exemptions for law enforcement. Then you have high risk systems, limited risk systems, and minimal risk systems. And as I mentioned, the requirements on the relevant developers and people involved in the activities relating to those AI systems will depend on how their system is categorized.
Wow. So the categorization of systems and the developers that created them is going to impact significantly who's actually affected by the law and what they are and not entitled to do.
Absolutely. I imagine there's going to be lots of arguments and there'll be a lot of detail around how these categories are drafted, because ultimately, if you breach these categories, there are some real teeth to these regulations, kind of like, or the same kind of momentum or the same type of thinking as GDPR. You have a euro figure or a percentage of global turnover, depending on what you've breached. So, for example, the highest kind of fine that can be issued is 35 million euros or 70% of global turnover. We're not talking up at, no money here. So people are going to be really interested in how, the final text comes about.
Yeah. And again, of course, we've seen this all in practice with GDPR. So forewarned.
Exactly.
This attacks lots of different issues that identified as risks, including facial recognition and the uses of that. I think including intellectual property and copyright with reference to the training of large language models.
That's absolutely right. I think so large language models, generative AI, foundational models, the discussion was about whether there should be a requirement to disclose information and copyrighted information or get consent to use copyrighted information. So that's something that will definitely be welcomed by a lot of people from creative industries or that have their copyrighted materials out there.
And I think this also requires that developers of AI systems provide more transparency on how these systems were developed and trained and what data they were trained on, and to inform end users that this is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you hit the nail on the head there. Transparency is a real kind of theme running through the regulation, as well as, looking at safety. So how the transparency in how AI systems are trained can build safer systems to protect, human interest.
And this excludes some areas, doesn't it? Because I think I'm right in saying it excludes research and development. So
That's
research
right. Yeah.
research that's not made it into the public domain is not being sold.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. So if you're just doing something at home, or if you're just tinkering around in your AI lab, you're not harming the public. The idea and the real fundamentals is looking at people's fundamental rights. So if you're just testing something and it has no implication for the public, then you're right, the act doesn't apply. I think as well, there are some exemptions for AI systems specifically designed for defense and military purposes. And again, the same rationale applies for R&D as if you're utilizing AI just for your own, personal use. I think if you look at open source as well, or the scope of the act in relation to open source, I think there was some confusion around whether it would be within or without of the scope. So whether open source would be excluded from the scope of the act. And where they came to was that it is in certain instances. So aspects of the act apply to open source of high risk prohibited AI. So high risk or prohibited AI. And also if open source is a general purpose AI, then the act would apply as well.
and also open source by nature is more transparent than proprietary software.
Exactly.
It sort of lends itself to regulation or not being regulated.
Mm-hmm.
So turning now to the rest of the world for a moment, we touched on it a few times for different reasons in the discussion in the last 10 minutes, but how is this act going to influence and impact the rest of the world?
So I think it's definitely going to create some more conversation, and it's definitely going to put some pressure on the other leading AI jurisdictions. So, like I mentioned, the UK, the US, potentially Japan. I think we're going to see more conversation around whether, like we said, they do adopt the same approach as the AI Act. As I mentioned earlier, I'm still not convinced that it'll have the same GDPR impact and that we'll see the same requirements infiltrate the rest of the world. But we are seeing more international conversation as a result of, and I think as a result of just the bigger global conversation. So, we had the UK AI Summit and different countries signing up to the Bletchley Declaration. We have the G7 principles, an international guiding principles that's been set out, an international code of conduct, and this is only in the last month or so. I think October was a massive week for AI policy as we were running up into the final negotiations of the EU AI Act. So whilst I don't think that we will see every jurisdiction, succumb to the Brussels effect, I think we will definitely see more regulation in this space. As I mentioned earlier, there's sometimes a distinction between hard and soft regulation. So when I say soft regulation, it's like self-regulation and industry codes. And that's what I see at the moment anyway, places like the UAE leaning towards that more industry focus, encouraging innovation, really wanting to drive industry rather, and like I mentioned, being aware of the pacing problem rather than a strict hard law regulation like the EU AI Act.
Yeah, I can see that the EU AI Act is going to be too hard for some countries in their minds.
Yeah.
And it also puts the pressure on countries that don't want to be last, that want to be seen to have a view on this and to have policy on this and not lag behind. It will inspire movement across the world to look at regulations. And I think also it's a useful template. And we've seen in the region that the personal data protection laws in Saudi and the UAE have some similarities with GDPR, but they also have differences. So I think it's a useful document to move that conversation forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I guess just to your point as well, we've already seen earlier this year a slight change in the DIFC data law to expand to AI as well. So there's definitely movement in this region. I don't think the policymakers are, completely closing their eyes to the possibility of regulation. I think you're right.
And like GDPR, this is not a law that is only targeted at European companies. It's also targeted at any
Correct.
companies that are dealing with the EU and providing AI models and AI-enabled solutions to the EU. And there's an element of compliance here that they need to abide by the law when they're doing that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was one of the scariest points the thing that people were kind of most scared about when GDPR came into place. It's extraterritorial effect. And the same applies for the AI Act. So yeah, if you're an AI developer or implementer and you are targeting customers resident based in the EU, then you will be within the scope of this act. So it begs the question that companies will need to think about, their kind of BD plans, their customer plans, and what they're, where they're moving and how they're doing it with potential customers that might be based in the EU.
Yeah, which is going to start logically with awareness and understanding of these new regulations.
We just need to finalize them now.
very applicable to the growing AI development ecosystems in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, because we're starting to see full products and full models come into the commercial sphere from the region. And if they want to sell those models and have those models used in Europe, then they also need to be compliant.
Yeah, we've seen a massive growth in, obviously, I'm based in Abu Dhabi, and when AIQ was formed, 3 years ago, we basically had like no AI companies. Now we've got, a massive handful that are really ambitious. And we had a few announcements recently of some really exciting AI companies. So yeah, if these entities like AIQ are looking to become global powerhouses, which follows the UAE AI strategy, for Abu Dhabi becoming a hub for AI, then yes, it will definitely be something we have to look to.
So the growth of the AI ecosystem in Abu Dhabi has been tremendous. And interesting for me that I immediately sprung to mind when the EU Act was announced is that there's been a big focus this year from Abu Dhabi development community on open source. And those open source models would seem to be just the right fit for the European Union, given the new regulations.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
And I think open source also relieves some of the burden of having to justify how you built the model and and what you trained on and everything else.
Yeah, it's already out there, right?
So that could be actual opportunity. It could be a commercial opportunity for developers in the region, particularly the ones in Abu Dhabi that have already announced models that are open source.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you're developing models or solutions based on those open source large language models, then part of the work is already done for you on making clear how it was trained and what data it was trained on and all of the above.
Yeah, it's going to be like lessen your compliance requirements already or straight away. This is already there.
Touched on a few minutes ago, the UAE and Saudi are both looking at AI regulations and in general have been in the last few years looking more closely at all digital regulations that impact the new economy and all of these new technologies. And we've also seen quite a lot of what I call AI diplomacy from the UAE and Saudi Arabia getting involved with UN programs, with World Economic Forum programs and others to help define the shape of AI regulations to come and AI policy making. And I think in the last week, there was a UN high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence meeting in New York, I think, and the UAE and Saudi Arabia both have members on that committee.
They didn't invite me. How rude. I was in New York. I was there already. Oh my gosh. No, I think it's absolutely great. Yeah, I mean, our AI minister, Omar Sultan Al-Alama, is really vocal and really out there on the global international stage, talking about the Abu Dhabi, talking about AI governance here. And I think he's a great ambassador. I think lots of people will have seen that he was in the Forbes, top 100 influential people in AI list earlier this year, which is a massive endorsement to what he's doing in the region for the AI space.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see this voice come out of the Middle East related to, the future of our most advanced technologies. And it certainly wasn't there before. And now it's not only there, but it also seems to be listened to and given a lot of credibility by policymakers in Europe and the US and other places.
Yeah, it's great.
Are there any other angles to this new EU Act that might touch us here in the region?
It's such a lawyerly answer to say, watch this space. But I think we really do, although we had the agreement, after, 3 massive days of negotiation, we're still not at the final mark yet. So it's still really difficult to know exactly what's going to be implemented, and then to look at exactly how the EU and then other regions like the UAE are going to be impacted. So I'll give my lawyerly answer and say we have to wait and see.
I can't argue with that. I think it's really difficult to predict the timeline for this. And again, looking back on our faithful GDPR example, the Personal Data Protection Law, I believe that got delayed a year, pretty much the last moment. So they're now talking about 2020, which sounds like it's a good year, but it could equally be delayed if other issues come in the next 3 years, or they feel that gone too hard, too soft, missed things out, and detail certainly is going to be provided in the next 3 years, because an awful lot is going to happen in terms of AI model development and in terms of AI applications in the next 3 years. We're just at the very beginning.
Absolutely. I guess if people on the listening today are working in AI, or their businesses are implementing AI, to kind of get ahead of all of this, because like you were saying, there's no international gold standard as yet, even though the EU would like it to be their AI Act. You can kind of look to get ahead of the regulations just by doing an audit of where your company is developing or using AI, and looking at how the principles in the different legislation that's being proposed would apply, and then assessing and augmenting your risk related to that kind of assessment and those principles. So we can, as kind of business leaders or people working in the space, we can mitigate potential damage and issues for our businesses in the long term if we can get ahead and start thinking about the governance piece within our businesses now, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's definitely a place for methodology in this. And to use another copyright example, so data and copyright example, if you're placing a huge amount of advertising and you're not tracking the image rights of the advertising that you're placing, then that can end you up in trouble. And the worst kind of trouble to be in is when you don't know if you've done something wrong or not.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because then you're spinning your wheels trying to react to something where, you don't actually know if there's something to react to and what the consequences are. So being aware of the general direction this AI regulation is going, and being mindful to be able to tell how you are running your development and how you are using data for training and how you are sourcing data and all of these things is going to stand you in very good stead.
I think you're absolutely right. And I won't say this is the case for all regulators, but generally regulators are looking for businesses to put in place risk assessments, understand their risk, like you rightly say, and then put in mitigation steps. They're not looking for perfection. So you don't necessarily have to be the full bells and whistles and get everything right 1,000,000% of the time. I'm never advising you to not get everything right. But you have to show them that you're looking to get there. But if you're not 100% all of the time, if you can show those mitigating steps, then that'll put you in really good stead.
But if we look back at actually who this AI Act could affect in the region and elsewhere, it is the developers of AI models and AI solutions, AI apps that could respectively be used by companies and citizens in the EU. And so when you've had this huge transformation in the region with large organizations and government adopting the latest technology and putting in a lot of best practice in terms of legal and data management and transparency and adherence to different laws, in the R&D environment, I've got no knowledge of how much if that is there in the region. And certainly on the startup level, very often it's not there because you just don't have the time.
I mean, yeah, scarily enough, I was at a conference recently with a group of general counsels, and I was asking about their CEO's risk appetite in terms of implementing AI. These are like AI customers, not AI developers. And the general theme was that their CEOs were taking the theme or the approach, ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission style of implementing AI, in that because they see AI being such a value and having such massive opportunity for cost savings, it's kind of implement at all costs and then think about the risks later. So as a lawyer, I immediately went, oh God, please stop talking. But I thought that was a really interesting take, or that it was really interesting to see that that's how a lot of CEOs in the Middle East in particular are viewing the technology. It's the interest in the opportunity that's really keeping them enthralled. And it's the opportunity which is, getting people excited.
We need to round up in a few minutes, so perhaps if I just recap a little. The EU announced a new provisional form of a new AI Act on Friday that will be put into final effect in 2026. And this is designed to manage and legislate against the risks that are seen to be posed by AI, and focused, of course, on the European Union. However, the nature of this law means that if you're a developer who's based elsewhere, or you developed AI models, solutions and apps elsewhere that are sold into the EU or used in the EU, then you, of course, will need to be compliant with this new law. The big question is, of course, what the final form of that law will take when it is enacted in 2026, and even if it will be enacted in 2026, it must be said. Any final thoughts before we round off?
I don't think so. I think that's a really great summary. I think it's such an exciting time to be a lawyer in this space and to work in AI at the moment. I, for one, am really excited to see. I mean, you don't often talk about getting excited about regulation, but I'm just so excited to see what the EU, legislation finally reads like. And then, like we were talking about, actually how the impact that has globally, and then, on the ground for us in the Middle East. I can't wait. I think 2024 is going to be really exciting.
Yes, me too. Looking forward to it. Magdalena Konig, thanks so much for joining us on Thursday Deep Dive. And must do it again.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Well, maybe the next piece of groundbreaking legislation.
Yes, I hope so.
You've been listening to a recording of Middle East AI News Live for Thursday, December 14th, 2023. Brought to you by Carrington Malin. Thanks for listening.